Usually at this time on Monday mornings, on a weekly basis, we are joined by Randy Stapilus, publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing. In fact, today being no different. And he spends a few minutes talking with us about some events going on across the state of Idaho or certain political developments. But today he actually has something he's going to talk with us about, at least at the beginning of our conversation. He has a new book that he has published. It has a great cover on it, especially if you like outdoor scenes. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Top story with Bill Colley. And first of all, Randy, welcome back to the program. Oh, you know what I got to do? I got to pull you off hold. There you go. My telephone problems have become what you might call myriad in recent weeks. Is that a word that gets used a lot in newsrooms? There he is. I think he's with us. Perhaps.
If you're talking about me, I'm right here.
Oh, okay. I was going to say myriad is one of those newsroom words, although I don't know that it gets used all that often.
I don't think it gets used a lot, but certain types of writers like to use it a lot. Yeah. When I was an editorial page editor, I noticed it a lot.
You probably told people not to use it quite so much. Hey, talking about writing, you put together a book. It's marketed online at the moment, and then you're going to be, I guess, taking copies around the state at some point.
That's right. It's a book called Crossing the Snake. It's a collection of columns that I've done, columns and other web writings about Idaho over the last 10 years or so. And I've a couple of weeks ago I toured around northern Idaho and met with a lot of people and took the book around there. And a few weeks down the line, I'll be doing that in southern Idaho, and I'm planning to try to stop by Twin Falls.
What did you come across the cover? I mean, is that you in the photograph?
That is me in the photograph, and a neighbor's dog, and it was more the idea. It was just kind of the idea of crossing the stream of one sort or another. Although in truth, the stream in the picture isn't the Snake River.
Well, I think that a lot of people that's very eye catching, and of course that's important. But a lot of people who really, I guess you'd say, are news or political junkies, they're going to have a huge interest in what's inside that. And I think from the standpoint that there are so few people today in news media that have any institutional knowledge, I think there's a handful. You're one of them, perhaps in this region, as well as we have a publisher at the Times News who's a Twin Falls native and is now back in this area. But there's only really a handful of you. And this book is, I think, really a reflection. If people are trying to figure out how we got here today, you can go back and read all of these past columns and get a better understanding.
Well, it is a little bit of, in a way, it's a little bit of history as it happened. The governor at the time when the columns begin was Dirk Kempthorne, and that for a lot of people in Idaho right now that probably seems like a long time ago. But there was several governors ago, but there are a lot of things that have happened over this time. It's been an eventful enough period of time. There have been some few big stories, national, international stories coming out of Idaho. Larry Craig's story, lots of other things, and most all of that gets reflected in these columns. I was as you can see in what I write about that appears in the Times News and other newspapers. I try to write about what's current for the most part, and that certainly is reflected in this book.
And if people wanted to get a copy online, where would you send them?
Online, I would go to www.ridenbaugh.com. That's RIDENBAUGH. There's a great big picture of the book right up on the right-hand side of the screen.
You have a great deal of stories that you've covered this week, and I was going to say, call it quite eclectic when you see what you've got published this week. One story you referenced fire season, and you also have referenced you have a picture of a highway and not much snow on the mountaintops, and I would imagine the two are very much related.
The highways and the bare mountaintops certainly do have a number of things in common in Idaho. The bare mountaintops are a real problem, or will be if it stays that way. Certainly, a lot of people are going to be hoping for a nice snowy winter. in contrast to some of the winters that we've had in past years. It's that's going to be a real question for next year. Just how dry is the state going to be, and that relates a great deal to all sorts of other things, like forest fires, like tax revenues that come up, and what the needs are in that regard, ability to maintain roads and things like that. So all these pieces really do kind of come together.
And of course, when someone is trying to fight these fires, sometimes efforts to stop them go awry. And you actually have a story about that this week too, as well.
Yeah, there are all kinds of different approaches, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And there are often, ironically, after some of the really rough fire seasons that we've had, we then have ongoing, deliberately set fires to try to avoid fires in some of those areas next time around, so that you can burn out areas so that fires won't cross across. It seems like almost an ever increasing circle in a lot of ways. The way things are going right now.
You have a column that delves into the politics of the Panhandle of Idaho, which obviously it's almost like two states in one. I think that a lot of people who live here would say that, and there seems to be more extreme politics in northern Idaho than in southern Idaho. You spoke to a lot of people when you were in the Panhandle last week, and there's a belief among them that if more people would show up and vote, you would have a more moderate-looking state government.
I think that's probably the case, and your comparison about the north and the south is probably pretty apt. Uh, the north is probably closer in terms, I think, of its overall population to what you see, say, in the Magic Valley than its voting record seems to indicate. There are fierce battles within the Republican Party up there that you don't see as much in southern Idaho, and up there the more insurgent activist, maybe extreme groups, more ideological groups tend to prevail. And in the South, you don't see that as much. In the South, you see people who are self-described as quite conservative, but aren't quite as ideological or insurgent as they are in the North. There is a real difference, and I asked people up there whether they thought those kinds of activists were really representative of the larger population, and the response that I got back pretty uniformly was no, and we don't think they're very representative of the total Republican population either. That what has been happening more than anything else is that they have been very, very good at organizing and voting. They've been they've been doing it very well, and the answer to that, if you think that you really do have a larger portion of the population on your side out there, is to go out there and do the same thing. And there have been some cases in some of the elections in Coeur d'Alene and a few other places where some of that strike back on the sort of on the what I think of as a little bit more mainstream Republicans and some moderates, has had some effect. But it's going to be kind of a long road.
Our guest is Randy Stapilus. He's the publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing. He joins us on Monday mornings. It's 52 at 8:52, and you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. You also referenced there's about 1.3 potential voters in the state, but the actual number of people who do turn out for even a general election is small, and obviously much smaller in non-presidential years.
Yes. In presidential years, the number of more or less about half of the number of people, about half of the number of eligible people in the state actually turn out to vote. Uh, that's kind of remarkable. Usually, what we hear is in terms of voter turnout is a percentage that's somewhat higher than that, but That's ordinarily a percentage of registered voters. So that's kind of an intermediate number. If you want to look at the number of people who could vote, uh, but as compared to those who actually are, the number is smaller, and it's only about half in terms of presidential races. And then when you get into the off years, like 2014 was or 2010, then the numbers fall a great deal more, and down to around a third or so. So it's kind of a remarkable drop off, and you do start to wonder just who are these people who aren't voting, and what would happen if, for the sake of argument, all of them did cast votes. It's a little hard to know. You can look at polling that goes after the general population in Idaho and look at what it has to say, but it's a little hard to know what Idaho would look like if everyone cast a vote.
I can recall living in a state where we had more Democrats than Republicans, but the Democrats proportionally had a far greater share of elected officials. And it was said to me by one of the Republican leaders one time that they had a machine put in place that would essentially, on an election day, pick up people by bus, take them to their polling places, give them a box lunch and a $20 bill, and then the bus would return them to a certain drop-off point, and that's how they got them out. It was that well oiled, and I think that if someone could replicate that in Idaho, they'd be controlling just about every potential race that we had.
Well, remember the insurgent activist group in northern Idaho got to where they got. They became as successful as they did in large part by organizing very, very well. That was a big part of it, and they worked through all kinds of organizations, everything from church groups to other sorts of activist groups of one kind or another, and they did it. They have done a great job of getting people out to vote. What anybody else who wants to compete with them has to do is the same thing, just in a different way.
The blueprint is there. I think it's pretty much common for anyone who'd like to adopt it. You also have a story about Sherry Ibarra, our state education chief, and it mentions she's putting together a plan for limited English proficiency, and this sounds like an effort to try, especially with the migrant children, to I guess increase their English language skills and perhaps then increase their ability to learn in the classroom.
Right, and that's various kinds of efforts along these lines have been tried and dropped over the years, but this looks like a fairly comprehensive one, and it will be interesting to see how far she's able to push that. Sometimes it can be a little bit politically sensitive, but this looks like a fairly strong effort on her part. When she worked at the Mountain Home School District, which she did for a good number of years, she encountered a good number of people there who did not speak English, and it was a significant factor in that district. And I'm sure that she brings some of that history with her to this consideration in the state. But there are lots of places in the state that certainly plenty of places in Magic Valley that encounter a good number of students who do not speak English with great proficiency, or for whom it's not really their native language.
In fact, people who actually, those of us on the right who would say we think people should, if they're coming here, at least learn English. Well, here's an opportunity for them to do it. And number two, if it's slowing down everyone else in class, all the more reason for them to learn.
Yeah. Well, and I think those are two good arguments that she's very likely to make to the legislature, and very possibly she'll pick up some legislative support for exactly those kinds of reasons. If you support the use of English in the United States, then this is the sort of thing, this sort of program that you should be supporting.
We only have about 20 seconds to go, so we'll ask you again a website address for people who are listening this morning and would like to take a look at the briefing.
That is www.ridenbaugh.com. That's RIDENBAUGH.
We should point out we had a laundry list today of things we were going to talk about, but they can go to the website, they can check it out, right?
Yep, and we do what we can.
All right. Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Randy Stapilus joining us this morning, publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing, spending a few minutes with us on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I'm not kidding you. I had about 7 things written down, and even then, I could have probably had a dozen. News is on the way. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. That's 9 o'clock news. Hey, speaking of forest fires, Jerry Brown, the governor of California, has tried to link forest fires to climate change. Now, the LA Times, which generally, well, probably not a huge ally of his, but more than often than not, leaning perhaps his way editorially, says no, there's no relation. We've got some details coming up in the next hour of the program.